Hello, everyone. This is recording number 9 for Aristotle, a class on the Nicomachean Ethics. Today's topic is deliberation. And specifically, we will talk about what Aristotle says about deliberation in Book 3, chapters 2 and 3. Deliberation is a big topic in today's theory of practical reasoning, and it is also a big topic for Aristotle. However, Aristotle has a quite technical notion of deliberation, which is contested among interpreters. Aristotle says that someone who deliberates thinks about what is possible, doable by us as agents. And she thinks about what is possible with a view to what is going to advance the ends. Now, there are two complicated ideas here. One is this notion of the possible, and the other is this notion of the ends. And I'll just say a few words about the former. You might wonder, well, how does an agent know what isn't possible? So you could raise questions here for an Aristotelian theory of action. Nevertheless, today's action theory, and really throughout the centuries, a lot of philosophers have accepted as quasi-axiomatic that deliberation is about the possible. So that's all I'm going to say about this question, other than invite you to think more about it. The second component of what I introduced is, in a sense, even more evidently tricky and difficult to unpack. Aristotle says that deliberation is not about the ends, but about what forwards or advances the ends. The Greek clause here is tapostatele, and literally that just means the things that somehow are towards the ends or move us towards, advance us towards, forward us towards the ends. And that is difficult to understand. Now, the first thing to say is that there is a kind of frequent misunderstanding which is invited by older translations, where the kind of awkward phrase that I have used, what forwards the ends, is not used. Instead, people say that Aristotle talks about means ends reasoning, that deliberation is about the means to the ends. And that sounds as if Aristotle was concerned with an idea that is much later and often associated with David Hume, means ends reasoning, also called instrumental rationality. And it is important to see that that is truly not what Aristotle is talking about. The easiest way to see that that isn't what Aristotle is talking about is to remind ourselves of, what is it about ends that we have already studied at this point? Reading the Nicomachean Ethics, well, in book 1 of the Nicomachean Ethics, we learned that Eudaimonia, happiness, a well-lived human life, is the final end of human agency. And that premise frames everything Aristotle has to say about agency and the kind of reasoning that we do as agents. And that premise is simply not part of an account of instrumental reasoning. Now, in a bit more detail, we can think of this as follows. Consider an example. Here's a student who is deliberating whether she should major in philosophy or in chemistry. Let's say that those are the two options that stand out to her. According to Aristotle, she is thinking about those options with a view to what forwards her end of eudaimonia, a well-lived human life. She is asking herself what is going to contribute to her life going well for her, being a good life. She asks herself what is going to be a constituent of a well-lived human life for her. And these notions, constituent, contribution, are much debated. And for now, we can sort of set aside which of these notions or yet other ones are ultimately most compelling, the important thing is that we don't talk about means. Because in that kind of context of thinking about eudaimonia as the final end, notions like contribution or constitution are really the key ideas. Now, suppose we pursue our example a bit further, because we yet have to make sense of the fact that Aristotle does not say that we don't deliberate about the end. He says we don't deliberate about the ends in the plural. So, what are the ends? Suppose the student has decided she's going to major in chemistry. Now that is one of her ends. And now she's going to deliberate about smaller scale issues. Let's say which class to take which semester. And again, the claim would be that in these deliberations, the end is not in question. Now she is deliberating about what is going to bring her closer to that end, what is going to forward the end of majoring in chemistry. So now we have a kind of reconstruction of what it means to say that deliberation is not about the ends, but about what forwards the ends. But I don't want to suggest that we have clarified everything that is worth thinking about here. And by way of example, I just want to raise one question, but there are any number of disputed questions here. So the question I want to raise is, think about the difference between eudaimonia as an end that presumably, according to Aristotle, human beings just have, versus the end of majoring in chemistry, which someone has because she has embraced it, made it her end. And now it is a constituent or component of her conception of what is going to constitute a good life for her. The question I want to invite you to think about is, are there going to be other ends other than eudaimonia that we simply have? Aristotle sometimes mentions health as an end. And we can ask ourselves, do we just have that end, or do we have to embrace it or endorse it for it to be our end? And that's a complicated question. And it relates also to, like, suppose we were to say we just have that end. What about other ends? Is there going to be a range of ends that we simply have qua human beings? That is a question I want to raise as extraordinarily important to thinking through Aristotelian ethics.